We're going to continue our Circle of Excellence. Our next speaker, Mike Siatkowski, you can come on, head up this direction. He is a crazy pediatric and neuro-trained ophthalmologist. He's the department chair at Dean McGee Institute, and I think you are also still the residency program director. So if you've ever had either of those roles, you see Mike's immense plate. And so he was the president of the COS for, as you saw, about almost 10 years. And he's married to an ophthalmologist, has 3 kids. And he has had numerous teaching awards, tons of publications, lots of invited lecture in 5 different continents. I'm still waiting on my first continent. And he has a Lifetime Achievement Award by the AAO. So Mike has left a great legacy at the COS in his term as president, and so we are super excited for him to come up and talk to us about crew and character development. Would you welcome Dr. Siatkowski?
Okay, is this on? Yeah. So I thought and prayed a lot about character, and I wanted to give this lecture, but it was a secular lecture, so I had to figure out how to give a biblical lecture without referring to anything in the Bible, which I did. So now you're going to hear a little different version of it. So, of course, no disclosures that are relevant to this talk. So I'm really thankful to God for my family. I'm thankful to you for all the things that you've poured into my family over the years. You see, after almost 25 years, my wife Rhea is still as lovely as ever. I'm very fortunate to have her. We have 3 great kids. Abby, who's here today, is a UCLA student, and my second daughter, Ellie, is going to Baylor in the fall, and then my son is a rising junior in high school. And we have 2 dogs and 2 cats. Who are wonderful, of course. So I'm really thankful for my family, and they're, other than the Lord, they're really the most important thing, and they're always in my heart and my mind for everything that I do. But as Matt said, it was just a year after I left the COS presidency, I had the opportunity to become residency program director, which I still do, and so that was a whole new family that I got, which is 15 people every year. So that was another group to shepherd, but I'm very thankful for them and all the things they've taught me. And earlier this year, I became the chair of the department, so now I have a really big family of 30 more ophthalmologists. And this is sometimes even more humbling because, I was called to be a leader of people who in many respects, such as Brad and others, are older and wiser and more experienced than I am. But yet, when God calls, you have to say, "Here I am, Lord." So I'm grateful for this opportunity as well. Now, as a program director, we talk a lot about the competencies in the ACGME. And for those of you who haven't been to medical school for a while, these are the framework of everything that we teach, both in undergraduate and graduate medical education. And you look at them, say, well, yeah, they all make sense. But you really try to explain them. How do you measure them? How do you describe them? How do you grade them? It's actually fairly difficult to do. So I think about other ways to describe these competencies, and ironically, my kids have gone to 2 wonderful schools, and they have had 2 different mottos, which one is work hard, think well, work well with others, and the other one is to learn, to lead, and to serve. And Brad went to that school, and I think these actually really embody the competencies that we try to teach young doctors really well. So now what is character? Character doesn't show up in the competencies. So it is a group of innate, distinctive qualities particular to every individual. Or another way I think of it is what you do, what you think, how you behave when no one is watching, no one's listening, and nobody really knows what's going on inside you. And I think that if you have strong character, that it not only encompasses all the competencies, but it transcends the competencies. And you know it when you see it. This is, anyone who that is? That's Potter Stewart, the Supreme Court Justice, who said, I can't really define pornography, but I know it when I see it. And we know character when we see it. We know good character. It's very obvious. We know kind of questionable character, and we clearly can tell character that is suboptimal and inappropriate. So we all know in our hearts, because God is the ultimate designer, and Jesus had the ultimate perfect character. So in our DNA, we have the ability to recognize what good character is, and we have the ability to desire it and aspire to it. Now, I've learned lots of different examples of character throughout my time, and some of it's been by watching others. So here's an example of a resident that I had, and you see he had a $5,000 grant, and the deal was I had to sign off on the payment for it. So he had something for $49.98 here, and I wasn't available. I was out of town, so this is the signatures that went through with the payment for that. The only problem is this is actually my signature. So this was a resident who I thought, this character is not really good here. So we had to talk about character. I've had some other character examples from residents. The car, the resident and spouse decided to sell their cars, get one luxury car, and the resident said, well, my spouse finishes work at 4, so I'll be leaving at 4 o'clock every day. So that was an interesting character thing. Then, and she didn't finish the residency. So this is a surgical simulator. It's an ICE. You probably have heard of that. It's a sort of VR cataract simulator. And, I've watched character because I've watched some people who are struggling in surgical. If you teach residents nowadays, because you don't get to do anything in medical school, you don't get to do anything in internship anymore. I did like 1,000 IVs and, blood gases and lumbar punctures, all that stuff. Now they don't do any. And so we're left at residency to teach things that it's usually been taught at the undergraduate medical education level. So a lot of residents struggle surgically. So I've watched people approach this differently. And some people are so proud that they could not admit that they have a difficulty, and they will refuse to practice. Other people will practice really hard. They will become an excellent surgeon, not because they're talented, but solely because they've decided to work and be self-disciplined. So these are great examples of character I've learned from watching being a residency director. This is Dr. Ed Norton, who is a founder of Bascom Palmer. I had the privilege of being there for almost 10 years before I went to Oklahoma. And very, very wise man. Lawton used to tell a story about him, which really impressed me about his character. There was an old building from the 1960s, and he wanted to have a big new eye building. And he was going to see Charlotte Breyer Rogers, who was, the heiress of the Breyer ice cream fortune and everything, to ask for a $5 million donation. And he went to see Lawton in the office the day before he was going to have this meeting. And he asked Lawton to pray with him for this meeting. But he didn't ask Lawton to pray that they would get the donation. He asked Lawton to pray that God's will would be done. And they did get the donation. But Lawton was so impressed by that, and so it impressed me so much. A great example of character. This is my mother. This is her 90th birthday. She died earlier this year, and her funeral was last week because of COVID. And, I'll tell a story that when I was in middle school, she said, you're not really going to get much for Christmas this year because we're going to do something different. She was a school teacher, and she had identified about 4 or 5 kids that she thought had a lot of potential but came from very disadvantaged backgrounds economically. Said, so what we're going to do is we're going to get presents for these kids instead. And so I helped to pick them out. And so she put on a big hood, and my dad would drive around the car, and I would run up to the porch and drop off all the presents at night when it was dark, and I'd ring the bell or knock on the door, and we'd drive off quickly. And it made such an impression on me. Not just that she did that, but because, my mother was sort of a social butterfly. She loved to be the center of attention all the time. She was, she was a former beauty queen and a popular person. But until I told the story at her funeral last week, I don't think anybody ever knew it because she never told that story to anybody. And when she did something like that, she never, ever wanted it shared. And so it showed me the importance of humility and keeping things like that private so you don't take attention to yourself because you do things that are good, because ultimately all the attention goes to God. Sometimes I've seen as a program director people get discouraged, faculty get discouraged. They say, I can't afford to teach anymore, or the residents are they're too difficult nowadays. They don't care anymore. I don't want to do that. And that's a sad thing to see. Sometimes I see the other side of the character where you get a response like this: I'm just too good for everybody that's around me. And these are challenges to deal with. And I just bring these examples. I'm sure you got a million of them, because we have to figure out how to deal with character. How do we deal with our character? Now, I'd like to tell you, I know a lot about character. And the most important reason I know a lot about character is because I have demonstrated poor, abominable character so many times to so many different people throughout my life. I've learned some from watching others, seen both good and bad. I've learned some from reading about it, but the most I've learned about character is from the episodes when I have exhibited poor character. So how do we develop character? And an important part of this is a response to trials. Of course, we're going to have lots of tests and challenges through our life. And most of these trials involve some type of failure. Either we fail, we do something wrong, or we don't do something right, or something or someone else fails us, okay? Or at least we feel that way. And we've got to make a response to that. And one response is to be defeated. So you have self-doubt, you become more isolated, you become disconnected, you have a downward spiral. And that's easy to do because it requires, no use of ATP. You can do that with no expenditure of energy. But the second response is what I call perseverance. I think that's what the Bible calls it too. And so it starts by being convicted, by being totally convinced inside you need to make a change to do something different. And usually that change will involve some sort of reconciliation with a person or with an event or something like that, or a re-engagement in a process that you were stuck on. And so this is extraordinarily important, this concept of perseverance, for the development of character. As it turns out, according to the Bible, that is the single most important way to develop character, by persevering in trials. So you have to think about, well, how do we think about failure? It's one of my favorite teachers, Alex Darden, says there's no such thing as failure, just feedback. And I think often we personalize failure too much. We come, instead of, I didn't do well, I made a mistake, it becomes, I'm bad, I'm stupid, I'm no good. And that's just, it never works to go forward, because that's not what God says to us at all. Okay? What he says is, he who began a good work in you will be faithful to carry it on to completion. Not that you get there right away. And there are a lot of stumbling blocks along the way that we have to persevere through to get to character, but God will be faithful to do it. And remember, when we make it, when we do fail, it's not because we are horrible, and not because we can't do it. We can do all things through Christ within us, and that's the attitude that we have to have. I want to talk about mentorship for a minute. We think about mentorship. Really, the initial mentor is Jesus. When he said, follow me to those fishermen, he said, let me be your mentor. He hung with them. He lived with them for 3 years and showed them different things. I've had a lot of non-ophthalmology mentors. I'm just going to show the ophthalmology ones because you'll know some of them. And most of them have spoken at the COS at different times. When I was a resident, Dorothy Scott was very nurturing. So when I was discouraged, she would really help me through that. Al Biglin was just the opposite. He was an ex-military man. When I was getting on the lazy side, he gave me a good kick in the pants, and I needed that sometimes too. And these are my fellowship mentors in peds and neuro-ophthalmology. Interesting. Of course, Lawton was a wonderful teacher and a great Christian, and so he was a mentor to me medically and spiritually and socially and behaviorally in so many ways, just like a second father to me. But yet it was Joel who really taught me to think neuro-ophthalmologically, because he and I just had the same way of thinking. And Joel taught me a lot about the details and the nuances of the Jewish faith, which was really helpful to me. John Flynn was an atheist who was the son of a charismatic Christian. I learned from John how he fell away from the Lord and how that could happen to people and me, and it was very beneficial. This picture is up there because these are people that I've had kind of mentoring me in different ways throughout the last 30 years. And I say this because mentorship doesn't end when you're in training or when you just become a Christian or something like that. You need mentors your whole life. And I've had these people for years, especially, John Clarkson, I met as a fellow, and then he hired me as a faculty member. Then he became the dean, and then later on he was the executive director of the ABO when I was a director. So for almost 30 years, I had John Clarkson somewhere in my life. And yes, John was a Christian, John was a smart guy, but I always had somebody I knew he would always tell me the truth, he would always point me the right way. I knew that he always had my best interest at heart. And we all need somebody like that. So mentorship is really important. Communication is important when it comes to perseverance. So one thing I learned, you don't always need to make a response. I know it's tempting to answer the text or the email right away. It's tempting to say what's on your mind. Very few things require an immediate response. Take time to think over it, pray over it, and generally the eventual response will not be identical to what you've said in the moment. Civility is not weakness. Civility it prevents dehumanization. And we think that people that we disagree with don't deserve our civility, but that's not true. I learned a really important lesson in my first year of marriage. I said something that was really not nice to somebody, and I said to Rhea, she said, "You can't talk like that." And I said, "Well, I don't respect him." And she said, "Well, you don't have to respect anybody to treat them with respect. But if you start treating them with respect, you will learn how to respect them." And so that was really important to me. Compromise is not surrender. Compromise helps us to move forward. It is the glue that builds cohesiveness. But compromise also really, at its heart, reflects a profound sense of humility that nobody possesses other than Jesus. Nobody possesses a complete truth. And I think sometimes we have difficulty with that because we think we always know the best. And then there's this great little game I like to play called the most charitable plausible explanation. So whenever we feel offended or angered by some way, you have to come up with an explanation that could possibly be true, that is the most, puts the other person or the other group of people in the most charitable light. And so if you can kind of play this game and come up with that, all of a sudden the feelings of bitterness and anger and upset begin to go away, and you begin to see things from another point of view. And then you begin to feel compassion for those who have offended you, and it totally changes the situation. One game you should never play is the what-if game, because you can't win that, because it's over in the past. But this is a game that you can always win, because you always grow from the most plausible charitable explanation game. So again, I mentioned that we take things too personally. Can't do that. I can say to the residents, if I say, you did a lousy job on that, what does it mean? It means you did a lousy job. It doesn't mean you're stupid. It doesn't mean I'm going to fire you. It doesn't mean you're going to jail, okay? Similarly, if I said, good job, what's it mean? It said, well, you did a good job with this patient. It doesn't mean you're the best resident I've ever seen. It doesn't mean you're going to get a Nobel Prize. That's all it means. So don't overdo it. Be quick to forgive. I have come to believe that unforgiveness is as bad a cancer as pancreatic or any other eating cancer is, because it will eat your soul and your heart away. And we are called to forgive quickly because we were forgiven by Jesus. I love this picture of forgiveness, because before you forgive, it is a chain. It is a chain that is holding you in the worst bondage you can imagine. It's worse than debt and illness and anger. Unforgiveness is worse than that altogether. But when you forgive, the chain breaks. And it's not just the chain breaks, it enables you to soar beyond it. So I would encourage us all to practice that. Timelines are helpful. I think, sometimes we don't get anything done. We're not efficient because we don't plan. Jesus had a schedule every day. He knew what he was doing, so I think we need to try to do that. I have this other thing I call elephant eating and the bites. So it says, David says, in all your ways submit to him, he'll make your paths straight. Notice it doesn't say he'll get you there quickly. He'll get you there one step at a time. It'll be a straight way. It'll be an efficient way. And what you got to do is you celebrate each step. Just like how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Celebrate each bite. Don't feel like you're discouraged because you haven't eaten the whole thing. You know, be happy with what we do. Each day has enough trouble for its own, but each day has enough work for its own too. Be happy with it. And the other thing I've learned is good enough versus the best you can do. So the psalmist says there is a limit to perfection. We can't obviously be perfect. So, you know, we can't try to be perfect in everything. If you think about it, ultimately, you know, Jesus could have, you know, miraculously handled every single problem he encountered right away with a snap of fingers, but he chose not to work that way. And if you think about it, the getting from good enough to the best you can do, or getting from, you know, a 95% job to a 99 job, takes you as much time and effort as it does taking you getting from a 50% job to a 95% job. Use that that extra time effort for the things that really need it. God will show you what they are, but don't waste your energy on that, because you miss things that come by other times. So, as it turns out, good enough is usually good enough. Wellness, I mean, we hear about wellness, but these are the 4 F's in wellness. I think, obviously, we have to show equal attention to all of these, and they're all important. None of these is more important than the other, because we were made to be with people. We were made to be part of a body of believers. Jesus had fun. He laughed a lot. You know, how many stories does he have in a dinner party or at a wedding, or you're having a lot of fun? I mean, I like the fact that Jesus liked food a lot. So, you know, he had a really balanced life, and we sometimes tend to look at pieces of it when that's not what we should do. Okay, I love Fred Rogers, and you remember, I like you just the way you are, but this is so important when it comes to perseverance. And if you cannot grasp the fact that God's love cannot be earned, cannot be deserved, cannot be won at all, that you have it because of who he is, not because of who we are, it's going to be really hard to persevere. Something I say to the residents all the time is, you do not get a trophy for brainstem function. It's not the way it works, okay? But that doesn't mean that you're not lovable. That doesn't mean that you're not capable of great things. And so he said, if you have never seen this, I think you should all get online and see his commencement at Dartmouth College in 2012. So he says a statement, you don't need to do anything spectacular to be valued or loved, and you don't, because you're made by God, and that's the character of God. If you don't get this, perseverance is going to become a chore. If you can get this, perseverance becomes possible. Perseverance, in fact, becomes fun because it reminds you of this all the time. It becomes uplifting if we can get to that point. It's such a simple truth, but it's hard for us, especially as type A doctors, to get to that. So perseverance in trials is really what builds character. And I got a great lesson from this. Last year I got an MBA because I had this midlife crisis. I told my, I didn't have an affair. I didn't buy a Maserati. I didn't, break the bank. But I got an MBA, so at least it could have been a lot worse. But one of the courses I had was organizational behavior, and I've forgotten most of the accounting and marketing and all that stuff and investment stuff that I learned. But this was a great course. And we had to do this little exercise called Your Best Self. And we had to contact 12 or 15 people that, that knew you work-wise, non-work-wise, that were like higher on above you at work, like a boss, people that were below you, whatever. And they had to write 2 paragraphs on a time when they saw you be your best self. So I finally found enough people to write something for me. And I was amazed when I got it back. Very few of them had anything to do with a professional accomplishment, whether it was an article or a prize or a title or anything. Very, very few. Most of them were things like, you said a kind word to me when I was discouraged. You said a prayer for me when I was in need. I watched you help an old person do something. Stuff like this. And this was what everybody thought was my best self. It was really, really very moving to me. So it's not just the end of perseverance builds character, because we know that after character, we get a profound hope. And so this is a cycle that goes on and on. We have a trial. In this world, we have many trials. We learn to persevere. And I think, to me, that's what I really wanted to talk about, is how to get to character. Because, there's no other way to get to character without the perseverance. But when you get there, you build character, then you have hope. What do you have hope? You have hope for the future. I mean, obviously we have hope for the future because we're going to go to heaven someday. But you have hope that God's going to be with you. God's going to help me. I'm going to have another trial, but I know I'm not going to do it alone. I'm going to have another trial, but I know he'll help me persevere. And I know after I persevere, I'm going to learn how to develop more character. So I'm going to get better and better. In a sense, I'm going to become slowly more Christ-like. And its cycle goes on and on. And we, instead of, like so many of us want to despise this cycle or dread this cycle, you can learn to anticipate it and enjoy it because you have hope in the cycle. It's always going to get better. It's a beautiful thing about life with Jesus, is that you always have something to look forward to, and everything is always going to get better. It always gets better. So, in summary, in this world, we'll have many trials. You got to accept it. It's just the way it is. It's the nature of a fallen world. There's no point in wasting time and energy rebelling against it. It's the way it is. We've been told ahead of time it's the way it is. But God's going to make good for it. And we should consider pure joy when we face trials of many kinds, instead of dreading it or getting tense or just, not that you're going to have fun with it, not that you enjoy it. You don't enjoy having it, but you can have peace and joy in it. Because this is the way it works in God's law. We glory in our suffering, so we know suffering produces perseverance, perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. And so this is how you get character. This is how you get hope for the future. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit. This is a two-way relationship. God has designed this two-way from the beginning. We are built both to give and to receive love from him and from others, and we got to do this. So the last thing I want to share with you is a quote from Lawton. And if you know Lawton, if you read about him, one of the things he always liked to say was, "Speak the truth in a spirit of love." And that's so apropos for this talk or for today's society, because there's so many ways we can err in that. And the first is not to speak. Sometimes we're afraid of how it's going to be perceived, but can't do that. We live in a society where everything kind of prevents verbal communication. And it means speak. It just doesn't mean communicate. It means speak. You've got to talk, because when you talk, you have emotional cues. When you talk, you share things. When you talk, you flesh things out. It's important to speak. Speak the truth. What is the truth? Well, the truth comes from God. But if we are following God, we will know what the truth is. Sometimes we might get it wrong, but if our heart's in the right place, he's going to reveal it to us eventually. And you got to do it in a spirit of love, because if you come across as arrogant or bossy or judgmental, it's not going to be received. And it's not the way it's supposed to be. I tell you all these things because I'm an expert at failing at these. I have at least 10 people in the audience, one who's lived with me for 20 years who can tell you I fail at this. One who's worked with me for 20 years that can tell you I fail at this. And I've talked to many on the phones. I have failed at this over and over. And I'm sorry that I did. But you know what? I have learned so much from those failures. I have learned how to be better, how to persevere. Brad and I were talking earlier when he had first got his cancer diagnosis, and we talked about what we had learned. And I said, I think the one thing I've really learned through all my experiences is because of this, I've learned how to trust God more. I don't get so upset at the things that used to bother me. People that used to drive me nuts, I'm better able to see what the most plausible explanation could be. I'm able to think about how can I help them, what does God want me to do? What does God want to show me? I approach things differently because I trust God. And really, that's the ultimate purpose of our journey, is to trust God. If we do that, it's fun, it's an adventure, it's not always easy, it's not always the pleasant thing is it's often not what we'd have written ourselves, but it's good because he made it, and again, it's always going to get better. Thanks.